Hello everyone! I want to talk about the different eras of Sonic that we have gone through over the years and give them names that I believe are fitting in my opinion. If you've been on the internet, you have seen multiple names of these eras from fans like the Adventure Era or the Meta Era, but this is just me explaining the eras with the names I think that makes more sense to me based on the consistent theme that I see in a certain group of games. Without further ado, let's begin. The first era is pretty easy and self-explanatory, and that is the Classic Era, starting in 1991 and ending in 1997. This was Century Sonic's golden age where he was a pop culture phenomenon with revolutionary games on the Genesis as he was made to rival Mr. Video Game himself, and he made that mashup very close. Not to mention, he had handheld games that were solid alternatives to the console games. Outside of that, Sonic was a big star in comics, with one of them becoming the longest running licensed series of all time, and two distinct cartoons with Steve Urkel himself voicing him. The thing is that this era could have lasted longer if Sonic had a mainstream game on the Saturn that could have carried more momentum to last throughout the 90s, so it feels like this era just stopped rather than ending. The last 2 years of this era did rely on spin-offs that range in quality, but hey, Sonic R is the final game in this era, and admittedly, a nice send-off for the classic age of Sonic. Anyways, this was easy to find this era and what most people agree upon. Now the next era is what people usually call the Adventure Era, and it's a fitting name. This is where Sonic fully made his transition into 3D with Sonic Adventure, sporting an all-new redesign for the cast, hiring voice actors for the characters, and a much more focus on ambitious and grand stories with complex themes. This game set a new foundation that will be continued with arguably Sonic's most iconic 3D game, Sonic Adventure 2, with it introducing new fan favorites such as Shadow and Rouge. The follow-up to these games, while different in gameplay and tone, Heroes still carry some tropes that were established in its 3D predecessors. On the side, we still have the handheld games, going strong with Pocket Adventure, gotta get that game some acknowledgement, and the iconic Advance series, which are a return to form of the classic games with modern twists. These games are recognizable due to their amazing sprite work. Can't forget about another spin-off, Sonic Battle, having one of the most emotional stories in the series. Advance 3 was the final game in this era when it came out in 2004. Outside of the game, Sonic reached a surge in popularity not only due to him becoming a third-party franchise where we see games released on Nintendo consoles, that's ironic coming from the previous era, but also because of the hit anime, Sonic X, introducing a new generation of fans to the franchise. So again, this era is usually called the Adventure Era, but I feel like there could be an alternative name for this era that I believe could be more broad. I would push the Millennium Era because this style of Sonic with the new designs, the bigger stories in his games, his popularity rising again because he's multi-platform, alongside a hit TV show, all happened at the turn of the century. Adventure Era kind of seems a bit limiting in my opinion because what was established in this era has influences over the next eras in the franchise. Not saying that's bad, just feel like Millennium is a better umbrella name for this era. We move on to the next era, and this is where the 4Kids voice cast replaced the previous voice actors for the games. But more importantly, this is the era where Sonic was struggling with games that stained his reputation like Shadow the Hedgehog and especially Sonic 06. People usually call this the dark age of Sonic, and it somewhat fits, but I'm gonna put a pin in that for a moment. Let's look at all the 3D games that were released in this era outside of Sonic 06. They have one thing in common. They have a gimmick. This is the one with the guns. This is the one where Sonic has motion controls. This is the one where Sonic's a werewolf. This is the one where Sonic wields a sword. So far and so forth. To many people and fans at the time, it seemed like Sonic was just throwing darts at random gimmicks rather than making a competent game. Even with Unleashed and its cult following nowadays, could you really blame fans at the time that after 06, the next game is about Sonic turning into a werewolf? With that being said, was Sonic struggling in this era? Yes. Was everything bad in this era? Not really. I mean, my favorite character debuted in this era, so I can't complain. In the handheld department, Sonic was still doing great with the Rush series, introducing Blaze, another fan favorite, alongside a new gameplay style with the boost formula, which will be the basis of Unleashed daytime stages. Sonic had a new racing game with riders where instead of racing go-karts, hoverboards, or more accurately, extreme gear are the main vehicles in this game. The game received decent reviews, which garnered itself an admittedly inferior sequel. Also, Sonic, while not as popular as the early 2000s, was still doing fine financially for the most part. People forget that these games were selling well enough. 06 and Unleashed got platinum hits, plus the fact that Secret Rings was the only 3D game from this era that actually had a lot of praise, similar to that of Colors, and was a best-selling game for the Wii. It's just that its reception soured when the perception of the motion controls got worse within a year. Heck, Unleashed on the Wii and PS2 got positive reviews and were financially successful, so not everything was bad in this era. So, due to the constant mention of gimmicks, you may think I would call this the gimmick age. No, actually. While I do believe having random gimmicks in this era is part of his identity, I believe that the source of this era is just Sonic Team being experimental. My personal theory is that 06 really put Sonic's future on the line because what could they do after that? When you look at 06, It's a return to form of 3D Sonic, taking the same formula that was established in Adventure 1, after departures with Heroes and Shadow. Sadly, 06 became Sonic Adventure Gone Wrong, which got Sonic Team thinking,
now what do we do?
It's like if Twilight Princess, a game that takes a lot from a revolutionary game that is Ocarina of Time, bombed. A winning formula is going to be under scrutiny all because one game just didn't do it right. So I can see why Sonic Team was scrambling for something to work. So the storybook games and Unleashed particularly were just them experimenting to find a new working formula. This is also present in the spin-offs like Riders. It's experimental for trying something completely different than the typical mascot kart racer. In the Rush series, while 2D, is drastically different from the classic advanced games due to the new boost formula. So honestly, this should be called the experimental age, in which Sonic was trying to reinvent himself for years to come, especially after the train wreck that was Sonic 06. But that being said, the next era of Sonic, which started from 2010 and ended in 2017, I believe that is the true Dark Age of Sonic. This era was reactionary to the previous era where Sonic's reputation was declining because of Sonic 06. So, Sonic Team decided to go back to Sonic roots in the 90s as an attempt to recapture the spirit that made Sonic popular, without being authentic. 2010 saw the release of Sonic 4 and Sonic Colors, both painted as returning forms for Sonic. Sonic 4 Episode 1 was released to average reviews, while Colors was critically acclaimed and seen as the first good 3D Sonic game since Sonic Adventure 2. Colors introduced the modern voice cast we have now alongside being focused on telling more comedic storylines, which will be continuing the games for the rest of this era. Going back to Sonic 4, it uses nostalgia as a selling point with reusing level themes from the Genesis games like Green Hill to Splash Hill and Casino Night to Casino Street. Just like the good old days, right? This trend of reusing old levels will be present throughout the games of this era, and alongside that, during the halfway point in this period, we had Sonic Boom, a spin-off series that was made as an attempt to revitalize Sonic for Western audiences. And it failed. The cartoon is good, but Rise of Lyric? Who boy? Sonic Boom as a concept presented to me is what defines us as the actual Dark Age of Sonic, criminally misunderstanding what made the series great as an attempt to do damage control. This era was a century where the franchise was going through the motions and having an identity crisis. It was a shame in the previous era it tried to rely on the past to make things right, but the franchise ended up becoming a shell of its former self in the process. Going back to Sonic Boom like how it was an attempt to make Sonic appeal to Western audiences, Sonic was made to appeal to Western audiences to begin with. His creator literally went to New York City to get feedback on Sonic's design before the first game came out. Not to mention, the franchise itself was always more popular in the West than the East. Rise of Lyric, due to how big a colossal failure it was, almost made Sega go bankrupt and they had to lay off hundreds of employees. That's frightening. We then had Mania, which was universally acclaimed and one of the franchise's best entries, but that momentum was ruined by the subpar release of Forces. Forces has some promising ideals, especially with the character creation, but it just ended up feeling See, this era is usually called the meta era by fans. I do see where people come from using that term, but I disagree with it honestly. Meta usually means when something is self-referential or self-aware, and people usually associate that to the comedy in this era, but that's not meta if you ask me. It's weird because the series has history of being self-aware of itself, even with meta jokes across the series. Some may argue that reusing old level things again and again is evidence that the series was being meta and this era should still be called the meta era, but to me, that's just the series being unimaginative. When looking at the games in this era, specifically mainline, I can't really call them meta in and of themselves. However, I wanted to bring up one crucial detail outside the games, and that is again, Sonic's reputation. My gosh, was it tough being a Sonic fan. Sonic had no respect during this era from the gaming community, where he's treated as a laughingstock and people were trying to gaslight others, fans included, that he never had a good game. I can speak from personal experience as a kid growing up where Sonic had a rough transition was a talking point amongst my peers on the school courtyards when I was the only one defending Sonic's legacy. No wonder why it can be toxic sometimes. It doesn't help when officials working on Sonic had marketing like this. This series was ashamed of itself and the social media accounts were jumping in on it, making things worse, like it was okay to slander Sonic. Like, you guys remember that Hey Arnold episode with the chocolate boy? That was Sonic in this era pretty much. Like, say what you will about the late 2000s or the experimental era, Sonic was going through hard times. But this era, he sold his dignity for people who don't even like him to begin with. Also, let's look at the handheld games in this era. They dropped in quality when this era started. Colors GS and Sonic Boom Fire and Ice were good, but everything else was just mediocre or worse. A far cry from the handheld games of previous eras where not only they had a strong identity about themselves, but they're also some of Sonic's best games, and with the ones from this era, they're just cheap budget titles. With all that being said, that's why I believe this is the dark age of Sonic, and I want to be clear, there was good in this era. Colors, Generations, and especially Mania are great games despite their shortcomings in some areas. My favorite racing game of the franchise, Transform, came out during this era. Heck, I can even argue that Sonic 4 Episode 2 is somewhat underrated, but oh well. This was the dark age of Sonic, with the series hitting rock bottom, an all-time low. However, once you hit rock bottom, there's only one way you can go. Up. Now we enter a short but very important era of the series. This era lasted from 2018 and 2022, and I like to call this era the transitional age. See, after Forces, the franchise started to do some soul searching. This is where I feel like the multimedia outings of Sonic started rejuvenating positive interest in the series more so than the games, and I'm not trying to downplay the games by saying that. Mania got DLC in the form of Mania Plus, but at the same time, we got Mania Adventures, a new cartoon web series directed by Tyson Hesse, who previously did work on the Archie comics and Mania's animated cutscenes. This series was universally praised for its comedic writing and visuals, as well as getting a lot of mainstream attention on YouTube. The full complete series reached over 100 million views and put Tyson Hesse in higher ranks on official Sonic products. Around the same time, the franchise has gotten a new comic book series under IDW, which brought back a lot of talent from the Archie series, specifically Ian Flynn as a comic book series in the previous year. The IDW Sonic series in its first year became another strong pillar for the franchise, as fans who haven't read a Sonic comic before were now interested in picking up the series. Not to mention, new fan favorite characters such as Tango and Whisper were introduced in the series as well. Then we enter the year 2019. This is where the first Sonic movie trailer released, and
meow.
It broke the internet, to say the absolute very least. That design of Sonic was terrible, and there was a gigantic backlash for not just fans, but also mainstream audiences as well. People who weren't even fans of Sonic were outraged at this, so it made Paramount and the people behind the movie to redesign Sonic by hiring Tyson Hesse. In the meantime, the franchise got another racing game with Team Sonic Racing. A decent entry in the kart racing trilogy, but declining in sales over time, unfortunately. Although there was a new cartoon to promote the racing game, a la Mania Adventures, which became the standard that every new Sonic game going forward should have an animated cartoon to promote it. Fast forward to the end of 2019, where Sonic was officially redesigned for the movie in an all-new trailer, and everyone rejoiced. The Sonic movie came out in February 2020 and got mixed reviews, but was a box office hit with universal praise, given that a production company actually listened to feedback to redesign Sonic. The movie was so successful that a sequel was greenlit. Then we get to 2021, the 30th anniversary year of the franchise, where we got Sonic Central. The Sonic Symphony was announced alongside a new collection of classic Sonic games called Sonic Origins, a remaster of Sonic Colors with a new cartoon promoting it, and the next game in the franchise slated for 2022. A lot of people tuned in for the live stream because the series was getting popular again. The Symphony was released on Sonic's birthday and was an amazing event just to celebrate Sonic music. Despite being a mess of a remaster released in September, Colors Ultimate didn't really manage to sustain the game's reputation, or at least ruin the positive momentum the series had at that point. Sonic Frontiers was officially revealed at Game Awards alongside the trailer for Sonic 2, which is a big deal for the franchise. It was then revealed that Ian Flynn, the then head writer of the IDW series, as it was still going strong at this point, was going to write the script for the game, which was a huge news for the series as well. 2022 saw the release of Sonic Movie 2, which was a bigger success than the first movie, and people in the gaming community claiming to be the Spider-Man 2 of video game movies. Frontiers had a terrible marketing campaign in June where it showed off not impressive footage of the game. However, people were still interested in seeing more of the game. People who actually did play the game at Summer Games Fest said the game was fun. Sonic Origins released in June and gained much better reviews than Colors Ultimate, albeit it got scrutiny for erasing the original songs from Sonic 3 soundtrack out of existence and replacing them with that. Anyways, Frontiers finally released in November of that year, and it was good. It has very apparent flaws, yes, but it's a good game. It was a true return to form of the series with not just good writing among the characters alongside iconic moments from Super Sonic boss fights, but just a fun game in general. Sonic Team proved that they can make a good game after all these years, and at the right time with all this positive attention around the series. This, to me, is why this era is separated from the previous era and the current era we are in. My main argument is that this era was a transitioning point for the franchise due to the external media bringing much positive attention to it. This is where the attitude from mainstream audiences towards Sonic shifted from being negative to positive. People were interested in the franchise again after a long time since the mid-2000s. The movies introduced a new generation of fans to Sonic, no different than what Sonic X did back in 2003. Writers and artists from Sonic's multimedia career really rejuvenated the franchise with new blood. Sonic's reputation was being repaired and the series was treated with much more respect. Not to mention that the official social media accounts weren't being self-depreciating in the franchise, and instead having genuine funny memes. Well, depends on your sense of humor. I also believe this was a transitioning point for the series as people's attitude towards Sonic was much more pity, and it's as if a lot of people were saying, this guy deserves better. And a result of what happened in those few short years is a game that became the best-selling 3D Sonic game and one of Sonic's best outings in years, making the future look bright for the franchise. The next era of this franchise is unknown. This era we are currently in started with Murder Sonic, arguably the best spin-off game in the entire series. Just a fun visual novel with the Sonic cast just being the cells again, no longer butchered as they were in the Dark Age. Then we had the next classic Sonic game being Sonic Superstars, which saw the return of Fang, a new character named Trip, and also the return of Naoto Oshima, Sonic's creator, to the franchise. Superstars, in my opinion, is the weakest classic Sonic game, but it still got positive reviews, a solid entry in the series at least, and was financially successful, even more so than Mania. Really impressive since it came out the same week as Super Mario Bros. Wonder and Spider-Man 2 for the PS5, pretty much confirming that Sonic is much more profitable than he has ever been. Frontiers got updates throughout the year where they've actually improved the game's controls and physics alongside a new DLC story mode that introduced a new form for Sonic. Surprisingly, we got a new 3D game on mobile devices called Dream Team, which honestly, if you ask me, it's this era's equivalent to the handheld games of previous eras. This game was also really good despite needing to have an Apple Play subscription. Finally, we have Sonic S Shadow Generations. So most people want to call this era the Renaissance of Sonic, and that is completely fitting. I just want to hold off from calling that because I want to see Sonic Frontiers 2 carry that momentum the series has right now even further. I'm trying to push the goalposts back because we are getting a lot of great stuff now, but I feel like Frontiers 2 will solidify this as the Renaissance of the series. Specifically, I want Sonic Team's next main game to be the face of this era. Now we just have to wait and see. That was my video explaining different eras of Sonic. This is how I would define the different eras of Sonic we have seen over the years. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. I find it funny I made this whole video and forgot that Generation literally has official names for these eras. Oh well.